Okay, welcome. It's the last talk of the day for this room. So thank you all for being here. And I have choices. So I'm really excited to talk about recommender systems at Key. I'm a data scientist at KeyBank. I've served in this position for about a year. I come from an analytics background, so much of the context of the presentation I'll be giving and the conversation afterwards will be with the business in mind. Let's get started. So KeyBank is an old company. We've been operating for 200 years under multiple names. It's founded on principles of relationships with clients. I work in the commercial segments, the commercial field markets, where I'm responsible for developing analytical processes and new products internally. We have our consumer segment, who does similar type of work, but within commercial, we break out into business banking, middle markets, which you can see there are clients between $10 million and $1 billion, and our institutional bank. It's important to point out that our relationships are managed and owned by relationship managers, who are I'll be calling bankers throughout. They act as the quarterback for our conversations about new products, ideas, client retention, and new prospects. They own the business, and so it's important to make the distinction that when we build products at Key, especially machine learning projects such as this, they're built for the banker. They're built with the banker in mind. So what does that mean? Well, we have this initiative that's developed, the Commercial Productivity Initiative, which is intended to increase our performance from the bankers themselves, delivering new insights, reporting, dashboards, basically explicitly improving their productivity, but implicitly improving their relationship with our data-centric processes. It's not an easy thing to do. Bankers are trained to own relationships and know quite a bit about their client list, so providing new insight needs to be done carefully and very intentionally. So my product, the Insights Generation Engine, should you call it mine, it was built with a huge cross-functional team of executive leadership team members, bankers, machine learning specialists, data engineers, data scientists like myself, live within this productivity initiative. So let's talk about a generic recommender system design. Given a set of client holdings, or an item list, an item matrix, and some user context, we need to act on a query or a trigger in order to generate a set of ranked items through a recommender system. Give a bit more detail here. We incorporate a raw data store, a set of information and user features which are incorporated and brought together and then broken out based on financial information, risk metrics. These are things like our revenue, our sales information, profitability with clients, external, internal sources. So we're looking at credit information from our credit sources. This has all been generated over quite a while, and in fact hasn't brought together in a way that's been particularly useful. It's information which has been collected, manually entered, and for the first time is really being brought together on the commercial side into a raw data store. We refresh on a regular schedule. We're not operating at the scale of a social media. When we think about our recommender systems, these are static processes and are manually run. So we follow a schedule, which is our DSC refresh. It's a data supply chain. We have this in place for a lot of reasons, much of them regulatory or compliance related. And it is a little bit restrictive to our opportunity to model and iterate, but we're not operating again at a very large scale here. We have thousands of clients, not millions, that need an instant refresh. Once we've brought together our raw data store, just on my laser pointer here, we break that out into client financials, which helps us inform our items matrix, or our client holdings information. Again, we bring together client features. These are internal, external, and trended, so change over time, and all are brought into a product model. Our bankers who are building this model for kind of live here on this arrow. This is a bit abstract, but basically we need to operationally customize the leads for each of our bankers. So we apply a set of business rules based on surveys and discovery, manual discovery, and apply these business rules to filtered down to a subset of ranked items, which are high precision. These are then passed on to our Model Insights dashboard, which is very simply a up-to-date dashboard delivered in Salesforce. So it has a user interface that's usually 10 delivered at a time. Any actions on these items that are presented are stored. So how long the banker may have existed on the page, whether or not they qualified or disqualified the lead, whether it was left untouched, so in a new status, or if it was placed on hold, which is another decision. All of this information will apply later. So when we generate our client holdings matrix, which is right here, it's essentially just a binary matrix, a series of zeros and ones, which represent the holdings information of each client over each year. We have a client ID, and so if client ABC1 holds product in the year 2020, that indicator will flip to 1. This is applied across our entire client set, so we have a pretty good understanding based on the revenue and profitability information of each one of our banking products, which are quite diverse. We have information about whether or not they hold it, and we split this information out by year. We don't have a rolling window approach. There's room for improvement here, but we split by year, and that helps to inform our training, our validation, and of course our testing. We filter out any new products, clients with low to no holdings, as they're not as informative. So then we move on to the feature set here, where we bring together for the first time our raw numerical features, categorical features, and then our holdings information. So the numerical features are manually input by bankers. We want to incentivize bankers to improve and continue to input this information we need it for the model, right? It has to inform the model. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how we do this, but it's a very human process. We take in this raw numerical information, we impute using segments, which are generated in a separate modeling process, and then we one-hot encode our categorical features such as industry, state, and set. Lastly, this is all brought in together. Our holdings information is combined into the full kind of feature information. We pass through the product model. So before I move to the next slide, I do want to mention that all our validation and test processes, which is what I'm going to talk about next, are extremely important. Just as important is our labeling process. So when we think about this feature list here, we need to be thinking about how we can continue to improve it. So I'll get to that in the last slide. We take a validation and testing approach, which has the business in mind. Our key metric, which is lift here, is decided before we enter into our validation process. So if we want to see a lift of 2x or a lift of, in this case, 1.2 or 20%, then we establish that with the business. And then that helps to inform the modeling process where we want to cut off our recommendations. When we generate recommendations, it's just a rank ordered list of probabilities of purchase for a product in the coming year. And so we need to cut that off at some point and decide on a threshold. So our process looks kind of like this. It's an algorithm which breaks up the recommendation probabilities for each client item pair into threshold bins called twin tiles. There's 20. For each bin, we calculate a series of metrics, but the main focus here will be our lift. So we move along each one of these lift metrics, or each one of these bins, until we reach a lift lower than what has been decided by the business, and then we cut off our recommendations to a particular probability. The minimum selected probability fits that of the bin that it exists in, so in this case it would be about 0.4. So all recommendations over a 40% probability are then passed on for testing. We test on the most recent year, and so we make predictions based on the test sample. In this case, it would just be 2021. What products were acquired in 2021, and did the product model get them correct? So, when doing this, when kind of building out this model process, it's important to consider where we can capture low-hanging fruit. We don't want to operate a model in a vacuum. There's a ton of area of improvement, with data being brought together for the first time, compliance support, model risk support. There's quite a bit of an area where we can pass information back to the business before even passing what our output is our recommendations here. So we take business feedback very seriously. Our requests for products to be modeled are brought together. So for each product in the model list is our model process, which you just went over. But each product is selected by the business. And so these come from long conversations and surveys and discussions with business leaders. Then, as we generate those categorical, numeric, and holdings features, those engineered metrics are actually passed back to the business and fed to profitability teams who have the data availability to review this information. We extract the best features as a part of our modeling process, and these best features are then shared with the business directly. So we discuss this with our SMEs, trying to understand whether or not these features make sense and then helping to inform their business. Then internally, we conduct our cross-validation process, take a look at sampling, hyperparameter tuning, etc., and apply the model and do what we came here to do, which is distribute recommendations. Lastly, and extremely important part of this is once we've made our recommendations, we store the action and feedback in a text-based environment and then manually review that feedback and implement it in future business roles. So a big question here is how do you build something that may appear to be a moonshot project for a commercial bank with a small but important subset of clients, and it's to incorporate the business along each step of the process. This not only provides, of course, better feedback, better recommendation, but it also improves the input, because with the recommendation engine, we're going to see a feedback loop occur where the recommendations that make the most sense for clients will be qualified, accepted, and turned into brand new leads, whereas the ones that are disqualified with commentary are able to be improved and iterated upon. So despite the high performance that we're seeing of our modeling process, which I've made very small text here, more importantly, if we zoom out, we have the opportunity to improve our data processes, business processes, and then the model process all simultaneously. So that about wraps it up. I'm happy to connect on LinkedIn and kind of discuss this further. I do want to leave some time for Q&A here. Yeah.
If you go back to your slide, it talks about the quarterly refresh schedule. Talk to me why did you choose the quarterly refresh schedule? Because if you're a TikTok, you want it to refresh every day.
Yeah. So our refresh schedule has review dependencies depending on our data supply chain. So as that starts to loosen up and free up, and as that data supply chain improves their processes, it gives us the flexibility to work that in. We can't refresh until our input data is improved. So I will say in iteration within our modeling team, we do this on a much more regular basis because the input data is actually improving as a result of this work. So there is that internal refresh, but in production it's quarterly.
Are you able to talk a little bit about the client features or discoverability that you get from
Yeah. So we have the support of a consulting group, and so we bring in external information about client holdings. We don't have like a direct match on client holdings, but we do have segment matches. So we know a little bit about what client segments are likely to hold the product. So it gives us some context, but it doesn't give us exact answers. This would be very useful for this product.
And so is the recommendation engine, is it set up to integrate both the client's point of view and the bank's point of view, right, suitability, profitability, risk-adjusted profitability of the products?
Yes, and let me make sure I understand the question. So when we think about the input features which the model is considering, those are both client side and bank side. So whether or not we have the risk profile maybe for a client, or we recommend a particular product to that client on the bank side.
Right, because you either inside or outside of it, you're going to have the risk profile, of each client that you're obviously going to make your decision based on, right? Either inside or outside of the system.
those get factored in. So when we consider the product model, those are based on client features, but we factor those into our business rules, incorporating kind of protections around certain product recommendations based on the bank's risk profile. So on the bank side, hope that answers your question. Maybe we can talk after too.
If you go to slide 7, you're talking about training, testing. What's the approximate percentage, I guess? Are you taking it to 20 by 20, and then like 90% of those 20 is training and test for that?
Yeah, evenly distributed across twin tiles. So the twin tiles tend to be same size, close to same size.
So like training is like 90% of those, 90 of those, but then very validation various tests of this thing. How you taking them? So you're 4 students now.
So this is applied in validation to help tune our modeling, but it's not actually applied in testing. The testing is across the entire set. So those twin tile bins are just applied to help tune the parameter, which cuts off our probabilities at a certain range. Did I say a question? It's probability weighted revenue.
Talk a little bit about
Yeah, we did a great chat about this yesterday too. Probably don't need the slide, but for our data labeling, we use a profitability database to identify whether or not a product has generated revenue in a particular year. If it has, and that label is converted to a 0 or a 1, that profitability information is not always input into our source systems. So our labels are imperfect. So there's quite a bit of interaction we've been facing with the business to improve these labels and apply these. But really, it comes back to whether or not the product itself generated revenue in that year.
is there a reason that I score is on the rate? Because you know exactly what likelihood.
Yeah.
Is there not very considered versus
Yeah, just to make sure I understand the questions. We do. I mean, when we generate these, we give it a probability and apply that to the binary metric. But it helps with our kind of risk processes, I guess, to split it out by year. And so over that 12-month period, we'll have the binary matrix in there. But yeah, I guess I don't really understand the questions there.
So if I see lines of 1 or 0 here on the line, that's a gym.
Yeah.
We use something like
Oh, so sorry about that. So this is fact. So this is generated based on whether or not the client actually. Yeah, it's in place. It's not predicted. These are actually basically engineered. So it's whether or